ever happen to another child. I'd like to thank Mr. Butterfield, and I'd like to thank Dr. Burgess for allowing me to be here this afternoon, and I encourage my colleagues to join in supporting this bill. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, it doesn't appear that I have any more speakers, and with that, I will surrender the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Yes.
The gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, as a physician, a parent, a grandparent, I share the same fears that we've heard discussed this evening, and I'm worried that schools may not be prepared to act quickly in an emergency. Please support this legislation. I urge everyone on the floor to vote in favor of H.R. 2094 and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2094? Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2754.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2754, a bill to amend the Hobby Protection Act to make unlawful the provision of assistance or support in violation of that act and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials in record into the bill.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 2754, the Collectible Coin Protection Act, is a simple bill with a simple purpose: to equip honest merchants and collectors, as well as the federal government, with the tools needed to fight a new wave of counterfeit coins and currency. Mr. Speaker, in recent years, the United States government has taken extraordinary steps to make it difficult to counterfeit U.S. currency. We think about how the $20 bill and other denominations have been redesigned over the last decade. As the new bills have become more difficult to counterfeit, some criminals have turned to counterfeiting rare specimens of older currency, which have none of the security features that we now recognize. Others have invested in counterfeiting rare coins. Some people have gone to great lengths to create realistic fakes using modern design software and 3D laser printers to make extremely close replicas, and even purchasing the old equipment used by the mint to strike the original coins. As you might have guessed, most of the counterfeits are coming from China. Where else? The criminals have also cleverly taken advantage of the certification system used by the collectors to assure authenticity, and they've turned it on its head. Grading services, also called collectible certification services, evaluate the authenticity and condition of a rare coin and then put it into a special holder called a slab, encapsulating it together with a description of the coin and its condition. The slab is designed to protect the coin, but it also protects the integrity of the grading. If the slab is tampered with, the grading is voided. Some counterfeiters have now realized that they can counterfeit the slab and the certificate as well. This has the advantage of making it harder to examine the coin, since dealers are reluctant to break open the slab to examine the coin more closely unless they are absolutely certain that it is a fake. H.R. 2574, the Collectible Coin Protection Act, amends the Hobby Protection Act to deal with these new problems. Under existing law, it is unlawful to make in the United States or to import into the United States an imitation coin or other numismatic item unless it is plainly and permanently marked with the word copy. The Federal Trade Commission has the authority to enforce the Act, and there's also a provision allowing private individuals to enjoin violations or to recover damages for violations that affect them. H.R. 2574 extends the current law in 3 ways. It makes it unlawful to sell as well as manufacture or import a counterfeit coin that is not marked with the word copy. Second, the bill makes it unlawful to provide substantial support or assistance to a manufacturer, importer, or seller if the person providing assistance knows or should have known that the manufacturer, importer, or seller is engaged in any act or practice that violates the Hobby Protection Act. Third, the bill provides additional remedies for violations that invoke unauthorized use of registered trademarks belonging to a grading service. The additional remedies are the same that are usually provided for under the Trademark Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill has no cost to the taxpayer. It should deter some of the counterfeiting practices that are now rampant in the marketplace and provide additional tools to deal with unrepentant dealers who go ahead with their schemes to defraud consumers. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks,
Without objection, so ordered.
and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight in support of H.R. 2754, the Collectible Coin Protection Act. I introduced this bill with the bipartisan support of Energy and Commerce Full Committee Ranking Member Mr. Henry Waxman and Commerce, Manufacturing and Trade Subcommittee Chairman Mr. Lee Terry, as well as 3 other colleagues, because the manufacture and sale of counterfeit coins is rapidly increasing across the country. Manufacturing and selling imitation coins is a little-known black market industry here in the United States. With the invention of 3D printers, anyone with a computer can now create a fake coin with relative ease that, for all intents and purposes, appears genuine in size and in color and in weight. Unloading these imitation coins off on unsuspecting collectors has become big business and cuts to the very core of our ability to control and regulate the currency. By the time the collector realizes that he has been scammed, it is absolutely too late. Current law, Mr. Speaker, makes it illegal to manufacture or import imitation coins meant for sale unless that coin is plainly and permanently marked with the word copy. Mr. Burgess made reference to that a moment ago. My bill would extend current law and make it illegal to sell an imitation coin that is not conspicuously marked with the word copy. My bill would also make it unlawful for an individual to provide substantial support or assistance to anyone who manufactures or imports or sells counterfeit imitation coins in violation of the law. And this bill would also extend trademark infringement protections available under the Trademark Act of 1946 for unauthorized use of a registered trademark in connection with an unlawful sale or other violation involving an imitation coin. Mr. Speaker, my constituents in North Carolina and Americans across the country deserve to have the peace of mind to know that they will receive what they believe they are purchasing. Individuals who sell fake products have a real and significant impact on our economy. The manufacture and sale of counterfeit imitation currency cannot be permitted to continue. I am confident my bill will provide greater protections for our nation's currency and for those who collect it. And so I thank Mr. Burgess, and I thank all of my colleagues, and I ask my colleagues to support this piece of legislation and vote aye. This time I'm going to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I have no additional speakers on my side, so I'll reserve the right to close.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from
Again, I ask my colleagues to look at this and work with us, and let's get it passed, and let's stop this black market that's emerging in our country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
I urge our colleagues to vote aye on 2754, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2754? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1300 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 80, H.R. 1300, a bill to amend the Fish and Wildlife Act of 1956 to reauthorize the volunteer programs and community partnerships for the benefit of national wildlife refuges and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Runyon, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the legislation that I have, H.R. 1300, which would reauthorize the volunteer programs and community partnerships at national wildlife refuges from FY15 to FY17. Volunteers are the backbone of our nation's wildlife refuge system. In fact, in FY12, volunteers contributed 246 hours of work at the wildlife refuges across the country. The value of this work, estimated at $21.79 an hour, has an overall value contribution to FY12 is estimated to be over $34 million. With this annual authorized appropriation of just $2 million, we have received a valued return on investment of over 17 times. This kind of return on investment sets an example of how effectively leverage a limited government investment. The simple matter of fact is that refuges cannot remain open without contribution of volunteers and community groups. Volunteers currently contribute more than 20% of all refuge work, and equivalent to 766 full-time employees. Volunteers have also allowed visitor centers to remain open during sequestration. As a result of volunteer work, the Fish and Wildlife Service has recently stated, and quote, "There are no immediate plans to close volunteer and education centers for sustained periods of time because of sequestration." My home district in New Jersey is home to the Edwin B. Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge, which benefits from one of the best community volunteer programs in the country, the Friends of Forsyth. I have seen firsthand the invaluable contribution these volunteers make at Forsyth and know that the refuge cannot continue to operate without the contributions of these volunteers. I urge passage of H.R. 1300, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to join Mr. Runyon in support of H.R. 1300, a bill that will reauthorize volunteer and community partnerships for the National Wildlife Refuge System. The National Wildlife Refuge System is an incredible asset to our country. In addition to protecting habitat that is essential to the survival of many bird and mammal and fish species, the system provides recreational opportunities that translates into jobs for Americans. The 45 million people who visit a wildlife refuge each year to hunt and to fish and paddle or simply watch wildlife generate $1.7 billion in sales for local economies. They support more than 34,000 jobs and contribute $185 million in much-needed tax revenue. My state of North Carolina has 10 national wildlife refuges, and there are 516 of them across the country. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 1300 would reauthorize valuable volunteer and community partnership programs that benefit the refuge system. Sequestration has tightened even more the scarce resources we have to keep the National Wildlife Refuge System open and operational. The system depends on refuge volunteers, and we thank those volunteers, 56,000 of them, in fact, who contributed more than 2.15 million hours, valued at almost $47 million in just 2012 alone. Generations of Americans would not be able to enjoy these national treasures if not for gracious volunteers. Therefore, I commend my colleague, Mr. Runyon of New Jersey, for his work on this bill. Thank him for his work on the Natural Resources Committee. Even thank him for his work on the Veteran Affairs Committee and for all that he does in introducing H.R. 1300 along with Natural Resources Committee Ranking Member Sablin. I strongly support this legislation. Urge my colleagues to vote yes, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I have no more speakers, and I like to close, but I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from North Carolina.
I have no more speakers, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Yeah.
The gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman, and with that, I will yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1300 as amended? Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2610. Will the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House and the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2610, which the clerk will report by title.
Making appropriations for the Departments of Transportation and Housing and Urban Development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2014, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, a request for recorded vote on an amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, had been postponed and the bill had been read through page 50, line 6. The clerk will read.
Page 50, line 7. Administrative Provisions, Federal Transit Administration. Section 160, Limitations on Obligations for the Programs of the Federal Transit Administration shall not apply. Section 161, funds appropriated under the Federal Transit Administration's discretionary program shall be directed to projects eligible. Section 162, funds appropriated before October 1st, 2012 that remain available may be transferred. Section 163, of the funds for the discretionary bus and bus facilities program, $88,047,709 shall be rescinded. Section 164, for purposes of applying the project justification and local financial commitment criteria to a new starts project, the Secretary may consider the costs of any project in which private parties are making significant financial contributions to the construction of the connected project. Section 165, none of the funds shall be used to enter into a full funding grant agreement. Section 166, none of the funds may be available to advance a new fixed guideway capital project.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman,
The clerk will suspend. For what purpose the gentleman from Texas rise?
I move to strike the last word and enter into a colloquy.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Houston is the 4th most populous city in the country. But unlike other large cities, we have struggled to have an effective mass transit system. 10 years ago, Houston had only buses. Wider highways were always the solution for transportation. Over the past decade, Houston has built one light rail. It averages 36,000 weekly boardings. I have never been a strong champion of light rail, but my congressional district includes a significant portion of the proposed rail line in Section 166, the University Rail Line, which would go from downtown Houston toward the Hillcroft Transit Center. A majority of my constituents in the affected area that would be served support the light rail. I am concerned that Section 166 of the bill that would prohibit federal funds from going toward a part of the university line that falls in the neighboring congressional district, Mr. Culberson's district, number 7. This language, although affecting his district primarily, indirectly affects my constituents because it has the effect of really killing the whole project. Federal funds are needed to build the university line in Houston. To be clear, Section 166 really doesn't save any federal money. It just sends those funds somewhere else, maybe to New York City. If we're going to spend the money, let's keep the money in Texas and put Texans to work. I've recently surveyed the constituents who live in the affected area in my congressional district, and my office went door to door meeting with local businesses over the last few days, speaking with organizations and talking to constituents. Those in the affected area want light rail. On Facebook alone in the last 2 days, 604 people supported light rail and 340 opposed it. One Houstonian commented, "Houston needs a viable east-west transit corridor to connect to the Main Street line. As a 23-year-old young Houstonian, I strongly support the Richmond Rail and project for Houston's future." At least 26 community and civic organizations support the university line, and I ask unanimous consent to put into the record the 26 numerous organizations that support the light rail line that we are talking about.
The gentleman's request will be covered by General Leaf.
I thank the gentleman. At this time, I will yield to the gentleman of the sponsoring of Section 166 in the bill, Mr. Culberson, for a colloquy.
Thank you, Judge Poe. Of course, we'll continue to work with you and the committee. As I always have, I'll continue to support the will of the voters, as I have always supported federal funding for those rail lines that have been approved by the voters. And I look forward to continuing to work with you and my colleagues with the Houston area, as I have with Congressman Gene Green and Sheila Jackson Lee, to support those lines in their district that were on the ballot and were approved by voters.
I understand the gentleman's position and the concerns from my colleague and his constituents who really don't want the rail in your congressional district. I respect that representation. And also, the gentleman understands that we have a disagreement as to what constituents want in the affected area. Your constituents don't want the rail. That small section in mine do want the rail. I hope we can work together with Metro productively to get something built that is in the interest of all concerned. I'll yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. I look forward to working with the gentleman.
Well, I thank the gentleman for his offer to work together. I certainly respect his position. It's my hope we can move forward and we can work productively and really not block federal funds that are coming to the Houston area that would go somewhere else. Let's work together with Metro, the City of Houston, the Mayor's office, and the residents along the entire proposed line, see if we can find a solution that we all agree on, and hopefully we can keep this money in Texas. And I will yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. We'll read.
Page 52, line 14, St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation. The Development Corporation is authorized to make such expenditures available to the corporation and in accord with law. Operations and Maintenance, Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, $30,582,000. Maritime Administration, Maritime Security Program, $174 million. Operations and Training, $143,768,000. Ship Disposal, $4 million. Maritime Guaranteed Loan, Title 11 Program Account, including transfer of funds, $2,655,000. Administrative Provisions, Maritime Administration, Section 170. The administration is authorized to make necessary repairs involving government property. Section 171. None of the funds shall be used to negotiate or perform fee-for-service contracts for vessel disposal. Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, operational expenses, Pipeline Safety Fund, including transfer of funds, $21,167,000. Hazardous Materials Safety, $42,762,000, of which $1,725,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2016. Pipeline Safety Fund, Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, Pipeline Safety Design Review Fund, $111,252,000. Emergency Preparedness Grants, Emergency Preparedness Fund, $188,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2015. Office of Inspector General, salaries and expenses, $79,624,000. Surface Transportation Board, salaries and expenses, $29,310,000. General Provisions, Department of Transportation, Section 180. During the current fiscal year, appropriations to the department shall be available for maintenance. Section 181, appropriations shall be available for services as authorized by 5 United States Code 3109. Section 182, none of the funds shall be available for salaries and expenses of more than 110 political and presidential appointees in the department. Section 183, no recipient of funds shall disseminate personal information obtained by a State Department of Motor Vehicles record. Section 184, funds received by the administration from states, counties, other public authorities, and private sources may be credited to the administration's Federal Aid Highways account. Section 185, none of the funds may be used to make a grant unless the Secretary notifies the committees before any agreement totaling $500,000 or more is announced by the Department. Section 186, rebates, minor fees, and other funds received by the Department are to be credited and allocated to the Department. Section 187, amounts made available that the Secretary determines represent improper payments by the Department to a third-party contractor which are recovered shall be available to reimburse expenses incurred by the Department in recovering improper payments. Section 188, funds provided in or limited by this Act are subject to a reprogramming action. Section 189, none of the funds made available may be used by the Surface Transportation Board to charge any filing fee for rate complaints. Section 190, funds appropriated may be obligated for the costs related to assessments or reimbursable agreements. Section 191, the Secretary is authorized to carry out a program that establishes uniform standards for transit benefits. Section 192, none of the funds may be used for the California High-Speed Rail Program of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Section 193, unobligated balances made available for Section 1307D of Public Law 109-59 are rescinded. Section 194, none of the funds shall be used to take any actions with respect to construction of a high-speed rail project in California unless jurisdiction was issued. This title may be cited as the Department of Transportation Appropriations Act 2014. Title II, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Management and Administration Executive Offices, $12 million, of which $500,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2015.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Castor of Florida. Page 68, line 11, after the first dollar amount, insert reduced by $3 million. Page 68, line 19, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $3 million. Page 69, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $3 million.
Gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my amendment moves $3 million from the executive offices of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, including the Deputy Secretary's office, to the Office of Field Policy and Management, for a very good reason. The leadership at the Department of Housing and Urban Development has failed my neighbors in Florida under its unsubstantiated plan to remove the on-the-ground community-based personnel from our local communities and transfer these positions to a single bureaucratic behemoth. On September 30th of this year, HUD executives plan to move our local community-based HUD professionals to other offices hundreds of miles away. Yet the housing and homeless challenges in my community will remain. Mr. Chairman, Congress was not consulted on HUD's plan, and after HUD's plan was leaked, a number of members of Congress inquired. So what is HUD's plan? The Deputy Secretary said HUD plans to remove its representatives from the Tampa Bay area and the Orlando area, a region of over 6 million Americans, larger than 30 states, and from other communities across the country. I asked HUD's Deputy Secretary, is this a cost-saving measure? He said no. I asked HUD's Deputy Secretary, have you done a workforce analysis so that the HUD workforce is devoted to the areas that need help and the appropriate places at the appropriate numbers? No. HUD executives have failed to provide any reasonable justification to Congress regarding the closing of 16 field offices, including 2 in Florida. Mr. Chairman, I suggest it is not appropriate to concentrate HUD personnel in offices hundreds of miles away from where they are needed. HUD is just asking for higher travel costs and an agency that will be more disconnected from communities. So today my amendment cuts the executive office budget of HUD by 25% and moves those dollars away from Washington and back to the Office of Field Policy and Management to restore some of the HUD field offices that are being shuttered in 2 months' time. In moving the dollars out of Washington, my intent is to directly help our homeless veterans and those on the ground working for multifamily housing, choice neighborhood grants, neighborhood stabilization, the hardest hit, housing counseling, and more. My state and local communities cannot be served effectively under HUD's plan to stovepipe its personnel hundreds of miles away. Florida has a population of 19 million people, 1.5 million veterans, of which about 8,000 of them are homeless. We have 57,000 people in Florida that are battling homelessness, and our foreclosure rate is still too high. Over the last year, Florida has had the most homes, over 100,000 foreclosed upon. California is a distant second. Nearly 9% of all Florida homes with mortgages were in some stage of foreclosure. Communities throughout Tampa Bay have been hit hard by the housing crisis, and the reliable and informed HUD professionals in the Tampa Bay field office have been on the ground helping our neighbors daily. Earlier this year, more than 5,000 notices of mortgage default, foreclosure auction, or repossession were sent across Tampa Bay. Florida continues to have a very high foreclosure rate, and Tampa is no exception. HUD professionals in my community have been there to help. They have helped us weather the economic crisis, and the Tampa Bay HUD office has been critical for many of my neighbors and for community-based nonprofits working to solve the housing and homeless problems. Mr. Chairman, my amendment simply says that bureaucrats in Washington will have a little bit less to ensure that our communities, including my home of Tampa and Orlando and other communities across the country, have the professionals in the field that we need to help our neighbors, our veterans, and others with housing challenges. I yield back. Before I yield back my time, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Ms. Brown of Florida, Mr. Grayson, Ms. Matsui, Mr. McNerney, and Mr. Costa for joining me in co-sponsoring this amendment. Now I'll yield back the balance of my time and urge a yes vote on the Castor amendment.
The gentlelady yields back. This gentleman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of my colleague from Florida, Ms. Castor's amendment. And I want to thank Ms. Castor for working on this amendment. The housing crisis has hit countless districts across the country, Florida, California, and other states. but especially including my own district. I represent some of the hardest hit areas in the United States of America, including San Joaquin Valley. Although the housing sector has improved in recent months, there's still much work to be done. We must ensure hardworking individuals and families that have the best information possible when making important life decisions, and HUD field offices and officers play a critical role in this process. Whether it's through foreclosure assistance or for first-time homebuyers, HUD help is needed. Unfortunately, HUD wants to close various offices throughout the country, and we must focus on providing HUD with the appropriate resources to adequately assist areas like the San Joaquin Valley that have been disproportionately affected by the housing crisis. Reducing access to services is not the answer. Mr. Speaker, we've held countless foreclosure summits and workshops in our district. I've seen individuals in front of me that are losing their homes, young men, young women, tears in their eyes, and they're getting excellent information from the HUD service officers. And to take that resource away from these individuals is a travesty. This common sense amendment by my colleague from Florida aims to address this issue by removing 25% from HUD's executive account and moving it toward the field offices and policy management account. I know people in my district need and deserve these services. Ensuring HUD has the funding to keep offices open is a step in the right direction. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For the purpose of the gentleman from Arizona, seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to thank the gentlelady for bringing this issue to our attention. I know it not only affects her district, but others across the country. And I have to tell you that other members have come to me, and their great concern is that in many cases the stakeholders at the local offices where there will be closure have not been consulted or have not had adequate input into the negative effects that the closures will have. And so for this reason, Mr. Chairman, I support the young lady, my colleague's amendment, and support the gentlelady and ask for an aye vote. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. May other members seek time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Florida. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will read.
Page 68, line 16, Administrative Support Offices, $479 million.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from West Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Capito of West Virginia. Page 68, line 19, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $75 million. Page 69, line 1, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $40 million. Page 69, line 3, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $25 million. Page 69, line 4, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $10 million. Page 70, line 7, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $50 million. Page 70, line 12, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $25 million. Page 70, line 17, after the first dollar amount insert reduced by $100 million. Page 89, line 5, after the dollar amount insert increased by $350 million. Page 89, line 7, after the dollar amount insert increased by $350 million. Page 91, line 11, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $100 million.
Gentlelady from West Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to offer this amendment with my colleagues, Mr. Kelly from Pennsylvania, Mr. McKinley of West Virginia, and Mr. Barletta of Pennsylvania. Our amendment puts $350 million back into the Community Development Block Grant Program. The CDBG's budget has been reduced by $1.3 billion from last year, and these reductions, we believe, will deeply affect our local communities. With our national debt approaching $17 trillion, it is critical that Congress tighten its belt and direct limited resources to the most important priorities. I believe that funding for CDBG is a high priority. This amendment has been scored by the Congressional Budget Office, and it will not increase the budget authority proposed in this bill. In fact, it will actually reduce the outlays for fiscal year 14 by $129 million. The CDBG Block Grant Program plays a critical role for many of the communities who are trying to find funds to improve lower income and underutilized area. It helps tremendously in the rural areas. In my home state of West Virginia, unfortunately, there are still some West Virginians who have to drive to fill up a water tank because they don't have access to safe drinking water. The CDBG program has been critical in funding the safe drinking water and sewer projects to many areas in West Virginia. Through the Small Cities CDBG Fund, West Virginia has invested $80 million over the last 5 years to improve access to clean water and to develop water and wastewater systems. These projects provided a safe drinking water project in Buffalo, West Virginia, and provided clean water, drinking water to over 100 residents. In my hometown of Charleston, West Virginia, this program has helped much-needed help for our senior citizens, for road repairs, and our homeless shelters. The program has produced results, and our local governments need this funding to be reinstated so they can continue helping the communities because they need our support. It was very difficult to find an offset for this. The home program has helped a lot of low-income individuals find affordable housing over the past 20 years. However, there have been grave concerns regarding oversight of the program, and HUD has been slow to adapt many of the recommendations proposed by various auditors, including a GAO audit performed last February. I'm hopeful that HUD will review these cuts in their budget as proof that Congress is serious about oversight and will increase the oversight of the home program. The CDBG program is a vital one, essential to states like mine and those of my colleagues who introduced this amendment. So I ask all my colleagues to support this amendment, and I reserve the rest of my time.
The gentlelady
I yield back.
Yields back. What purpose is the gentleman from Iowa?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd rise in support of the amendment. The gentlewoman from West Virginia, obviously we've got a very difficult allocation, and we understand the importance of the program, and so with that, I would ask an aye vote on this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, Mr.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I join Chairman Latham and the gentlelady from West Virginia. CDBG is a great program. When I was a county supervisor, I saw the great work that we use the monies to do infrastructure development and help the communities and allow the other local officials to decide how those monies were going to be used. But I have concerns about this amendment. It cuts HUD's salaries and expenses by $250 million, and this level will likely mean staff layoffs, especially in the office that administers the CDBG program. It also cuts the home program by $100 million, even while it is at a record low level in this bill. The amendment makes these draconian cuts to other programs, and the CDBG levels would still be well below the 1975 level. Robbing Peter to play Paul is a direct result of the Runyon budget and the inadequate 302B allocations, and for that reason I would oppose the amendment, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from West Virginia. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will read. Oh, pardon. Clerk will suspend. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Velasquez of New York. Page 68, line 19, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million. Page 69, line 1, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $7 million. Page 69, line 3, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $3 million. Page 101, line 14, after the first dollar amount, insert increased by $10 million.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, families that receive housing counseling and home inspections make better decisions when it comes to purchasing or refinancing a home. They understand the financial burdens they can reasonably assume and what future costs they may incur due to home ownership, reducing their individual risk of foreclosure in the future. Fewer individual foreclosures also benefit surrounding communities. Home prices remain stable, blight is reduced, more families remain in place. That is why I have been relentless in urging HUD to improve the educational resources available to borrowers when purchasing or refinancing a home. Currently, HUD is working to improve its certified housing counselor training for potential and existing home buyers, as well as develop home inspection educational materials for consumers when purchasing a home. Unfortunately, the issuance of these resources has been delayed. To date, only a few of the housing counseling documents have been released for public comment, including the application for the Housing Counseling Federal Advisory Committee and certification for HUD housing counseling. The legislation before us today, H.R. 2610, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies Appropriation Act, will reduce funding to finalize these resources at the time they are most needed. Many low to moderate income homeowners are still struggling to afford their homes. My amendment will provide the additional $10 million necessary to restore housing counseling assistance funding to its FY 2013 level. Funding from HUD's Administrative Supportive Offices account will be used to offset the amendment. It will not impact any of the transportation or housing programs funding amounts. The net impact is zero on the budget authority, and it will reduce 2014 outlays by $4 million, actually saving the government money over time. This increased funding will help HUD complete its statutory obligations and start providing housing counseling information to FHA-insured borrowers and other interested families. These resources are essential for educating families about the financial burdens of owning a home, the importance of conducting a home inspection prior to purchase, and informing underwater homeowners of their options to avoid foreclosure. We cannot allow these families to wait any longer for these critical home ownership information resources. I urge the House to protect families' interests when purchasing a home by voting yes on this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. Our bill had already taken steps to reduce HUD's salary and expenses budget in the interest of fiscal responsibility. In addition to these reductions, we have several amendments. We just passed an amendment that reduced that account. We also have several more amendments at the desk to further eats at the administrative expenses to offset increases in higher priority programs, again, like the community development block grants. At some point, however, we cannot continue to take cut after cut into these accounts without jeopardizing HUD's ability to responsibly carry out its mission. And again, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for a no vote and oppose this amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5
Mr. Chairman,
minutes.
as described by my colleague, Ms. Velasquez, counseling is very important to current homeowners, prospective homeowners, and with it, we ensure that someone who is going into a FHA-backed home is able to have all the information in order to be good homeowners. And obviously, home inspection is very important. And to those people who are still underwater, they still need the the counseling and the information from HUD. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the gentlelady's amendment.
Gentleman yields back.
Gentleman yields back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from New York. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment by the gentlelady from New York will be postponed. For what purposes, the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Barber of Arizona. Page 68, line 19, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $1,500,000. Page 69, line 1, after the dollar amount, insert reduced by $1,500,000. Page 71, line 22, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $1 million. Page 80, line 4, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $1 million.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to request approval of an amendment that will support citizens of our great nation who desperately need and deserve our assistance. I'm talking about our nation's homeless veterans. At a time when our country needed them, they answered the call, personally sacrificing for the greater good, for our greater good. My amendment will increase funding for housing vouchers by $1 million, and it is offset by a reduction in the Administrative Support Office's budget. We owe these men and women more than just a debt of gratitude. We owe them our unflagging support, commensurate with their level of service, equal to their sacrifice for you and for me and for all Americans who enjoy the freedoms that these veterans have protected. Unfortunately, too many veterans still lack the necessary resources to keep a permanent roof over their heads. This, I hope we all agree, is completely unacceptable. The Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that approximately 62,000 veterans remain homeless. That is 62,000 members of our armed forces who made an unwavering commitment to stand in the breach for this nation, for freedom, for democracy, and the values that are the foundation of the United States of America. According to the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, nearly 1/3 of chronically homeless people are veterans. The men and women who put on the uniform of our armed services took a solemn oath to do what we asked them to do, and they should not go without in their time of need. When our soldiers came home from Vietnam, they were subject to despicable insults, and even worse, did not receive the supports we promised them. Thousands of them make up the homeless population in our country today. This was a national disgrace, and we must do better for them and for the new veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who are coming home every day. We must not allow them to become yet another homeless veteran. While the Department of Veterans Affairs has a commendable goal to end veterans' homelessness by 2015, it is shameful to even let one single veteran become homeless. In my home district in Tucson, the city is working to ensure that veterans' homelessness is eradicated permanently, and I applaud and support those efforts, but more can and must be done across my district and the nation. If my amendment is adopted, it would increase by $1 million the amount available to veterans for housing vouchers. It is offset by a reduction of $1.5 million from the HUD Administrative Support Offices. And while this amendment will not solve the issue of veteran homelessness, it is a small and important first step that we can take to show our commitment to our veterans. We cannot continue to fail these men and women who have so bravely served this nation. It is not a Democratic or Republican issue. It is an American issue. And I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote yes on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and unfortunately this once again is a political amendment If you remember last year, the motion to recommit the gentleman had that was purely political after Mr. Dix from Washington and I had made sure that we had every dime in the bill to make sure that every veteran was taken care of. And now to play politics with veterans, I think, is extraordinarily offensive. Because in this bill, we fully fund the President's request, everything that HUD says that we must do, every dollar is here for the veterans. And now to raise an issue like this, I think, is something that is not becoming to the House of Representatives. We have, like I said, Madam Chairwoman, fully funded $75 million for 10,000 new vouchers for our veterans. These vouchers are labor-intensive, involving both Veteran Administration and HUD officials in an intensive process moving veterans out of homelessness. The program also provides veterans with supportive services so that they receive job training and other services so that they can move toward a path of independence. We've heard repeatedly from HUD that 10,000 new veterans vouchers is the maximum number that they can process. Let me say it again. From the administration, from President Obama, from the Secretary Donovan at HUD, they're saying that they could not handle any more capacity than the money that we have. And again, Madam Chairwoman, I would ask a no vote for this only political vote. This is the second year in a row that we've had this. Again, I find it very, very offensive that anyone in this House believes that we are not funding this to the full extent of what is asked for and what is required for our veterans who have served this country so well. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Oh, for what purposes the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, I want to commend Chairman Latham for including the $75 million in the base bill, and as he said, that will deal with 10,000 veterans who are homeless, and I commend him and President Obama for honoring their commitment to service the veterans. Now, to speak about amendments having political motives or having political connotations, several amendments ago, I think we did CDBG, and I'm sure it had a few political connotations, but that's the way some of these amendments come forward. To Mr. Barber's amendment, I do have concerns that the offset may impede HUD's ability to carry out its mission, but I look forward to working with the gentleman to continue this important work, and hopefully as we work with the Senate we'll be able to increase the allocation for this bill. And so with that, I support the gentleman's amendment and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chairman,
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
I request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Chairperson, I have an amendment at the desk.
Did the gentleman submit his amendment to the desk?
Yes, I did. Number 45. I have more copies if you don't have it.
Would the
Madam
gentleman
Chairwoman?
present? For what purpose does
Madam
the gentleman
Chairwoman,
from Iowa?
I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
Point of order is reserved.
Not there yet.
Chair will advise the gentleman we have not reached that point in the reading.
We'll wait.
The clerk will read.
Page 70, line 4, Program Office Salaries and Expenses, Public and Indian Housing, $197 million, of which $2 million shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Community Planning and Development, $99 million, of which $1 million shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Housing, $377 million, of which $4 million shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Policy Development and Research, $21 million, of which $500,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, $71 million, of which $1 million shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Office of Healthy Homes and Lead Hazard Control, $7 million, of which $500,000 shall remain available until September 30th, 2015. Public and Indian Housing, Tenant-Based Rental Assistance, $14
For what
billion.
purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I now have the